speaker is extremely humble. She said, don't worry, we'll just go on to it. No, that's not right. I set a precedent, I'm gonna stick to it. Okay, so here we are. Welcome once again to day 2 of the 6th annual Sickle Cell Disease Summit. Today we're joined by an esteemed colleague who I had the privilege of meeting. Donnell's been a huge advocate for bringing Titi to this summit, and we finally made it happen this year. I'm so happy. Today, Titi Fasipe will be speaking to us about moving from innovation to impact, centering lived experiences to transform the sickle cell care journey. Dr. Fasipe is a co-director of the Texas Children's Sickle Cell and Thalassemia Program and associate professor of pediatrics in hematology oncology at Baylor College of Medicine. As both a pediatric hematologist and an individual living with sickle cell disease, she brings a unique perspective to improving sickle cell disease education, awareness, support, and care. Dr. Fasipe holds several national leadership and advisory roles, including with the NHLBI, American Society of Hematology, and the Heartland Southwest Sickle Cell Disease Network. She also serves on the scientific working group of the Global Action Network for Sickle Cell and Other Inherited Blood Disorders. A newly found member of the SCAGO family, I need to make sure we provide her with a warm, roarous welcome. Could you please assist me in welcoming Dr. Fasipe to the stage?
Thank you so much, Delaney. It's very nice to be here today. Excuse me. And I wanted to make sure, when people say, oh, send your bio, I had left out one piece because I wasn't sure how y'all overlap. But for those that know what Gansett is, do y'all know Gansett? Well, I have the privilege of being one of their scientific committee members, and so it's an honor to serve in that capacity. For me, it's important because it helped the sickle cell advocacy story become global, something that I think a lot of us in this room have been praying and dreaming for, so I have to give a shout out to Gansett as well. But thank you for the invitation, Dr. Ivy, Larry, Delaney, the entire SCAGO team. Do y'all go by SCAGO? Okay. SCAGO, I don't know. I wasn't sure. But all right, so I think this is the slides for the afternoon, actually, based on what I'm looking at. And I could talk about that now. Like a few of you in this room, I could talk about sickle cell all day if you let me. Today, we're going to only cover a small portion. While they're pulling that up, I am a Nigerian American. I was born in Nigeria, and some of you know Nigeria has the most sickle cell disease population, the highest population in the world. And so back in the 80s, I was one of the hundreds, thousand children that were born that year impacted by sickle cell disease. And I was the only one in my family with it. So throughout my childhood, I had a very isolating experience with it. There was a point in time where we moved to America, hence you hear my accent. And then when we moved back to Nigeria, I finally got to see the sickle cell version in Nigeria as an older child and teenager. And that's when I encountered other family members. And sadly, one of my cousins, she passed away during my time there. She was 17 at the time. And I'm giving you this backstory because that was my origin story of being aware that sickle cell is a bad disease. Children die with sickle cell disease. Why is that happening? Is it Nigeria's fault? I didn't know until later that it's everybody's fault. It's everybody's fault, which we'll talk about. Coming here and trying to figure out how to solve a problem like sickle cell has been an eye-opening journey. And I learned, and I think several of you enjoyed the plenary session yesterday and some of the other talks from yesterday. I learned that that journey needs advocacy. It's an essential ingredient. And so it was an honor to hear from your, I'm so sorry, minister? I don't know the right word. Honorable, highest honor, the most highest honorable minister on the work it takes from the health policy side. It doesn't just happen without planning, without advocacy, and without thinking. So anyway, thank you, sir, and thank you all. Okay, so we're going to talk about from innovation to impact, centering lived experience to transform the sickle cell care journey. Now, most times disclosures are like, oh, what pharmaceutical company do you have a relationship with? I don't have any relationships with the pharmaceutical company. The lens that I see sickle cell disease is one of an advocate, being impacted, but also I take care of children with sickle cell disease as a pediatric hematologist. And then I will hint at a couple of things that I do on the national side, so I just wanted to disclose. These are other entities, but none of them are related to drugs, and we're not going to talk about them in detail today. This may have already occurred. I apologize, I was late yesterday. But for me, it's important for us to reflect on people like my cousin and people like many of in this room have lost over time, some very fresh. A few of you are mourning the loss of advocates and individuals impacted by sickle cell disease. So we can take a few seconds just to reflect on that. Thank you. Sickle cell is a chronic disease. It has unpredictable complications. Those complications can potentially be life-threatening. But because it's a chronic disease, it requires lifespan care, lifespan mentality. So this table, apologies for the tiny words or for those at the back, this table just shows a list of the various complications that you may see with sickle cell disease and the age groups that they're more likely to show up. But sickle cell is a lifespan disease. You can have issues throughout any time, and some of these can happen over and over again throughout a lifespan. I'm glad we're now thinking about it as a lifespan disease, because years ago they saw it as a childhood disease, and in fact, still in places around the world, it's seen as more of a disease of childhood because children pass away so young. So I'm glad that in high-income countries like Canada and United States, we're changing the story a little bit, but you still see stories like this going on. You'll read over and over again about gaps. You'll talk about the stories that lead us to advocate. This is a news article discussing children who got stroke with sickle cell disease. However, they were born in a time period where we already know how to screen for stroke. And you can argue the key word in this title is preventable strokes. That's painful to hear that something was preventable and yet it still happened because the children did not have access to that screening mechanism. And I'm referring to the transcranial Doppler screening for those that are not familiar. So I struggle when I see stories like this because it kept on happening with sickle cell. It's just like, oh, yes, we know how to do this, but people aren't getting it. So this is when I formulated this concept in my head about, okay, what can I learn from the way we use our parables about elephants or proverbs and the various tellings? So one, people don't like addressing elephants in the room, but I think they're very important because it helps you not to miss the whole picture. And then, speaking of the whole picture, you may have heard the story of the 10 blind people trying to figure out how to explain an elephant to people, and depending on what part of the elephant they're touching, they will explain a different part. And so I realized with sickle cell, I heard a lot of spaces, passionate, talking about sickle cell, but they were talking about it from the viewpoint of their elephant, and they don't always acknowledge the other components of the elephant. So what are the historical perspectives that have brought us here today? And you'll see that this leans towards an American lens due to the history. I'll touch a little bit more about the ancient times, which I find fascinating. But for the America's purposes, sickle cell was discovered, in quotes, in 1910. And this is the article where it was referenced. And so that's the first concept of it. Again, in Africa, people were aware of it much longer. And through the 1920s, the 1960s, after that first article, you saw other reports, and they realized, oh, this is a blood disease, this is fascinating, look at what's happening here with the blood cells, there's an oxygen component, learned so many things, and sickle cell got its name. This is a sickle, for those that are young and babies and don't know. This is a farming instrument, people. This is a farming instrument called a sickle. And for those scientists back then, that's what the cells looked like. I am really disturbed by the name sickle, sorry, sickles, but because it has the word sick in it, it has now led to a whole thing when you've now called a disease sickle cell disease. And I won't remind everybody, or I will remind everybody of the word that sometimes causes some people to shudder, sickler, or just that emphasis on that sick component. So now, the 1970s and beyond were advancements. You learned about the science behind the disease, and now we're trying to figure out how do we take care of people impacted. I was really happy when he talked about newborn screening. Newborn screening is one of those public health changes that helped people with sickle cell capture and count the population and do something for them, like screening. But let's go back to ancient times. Before sickle cell disease was named, it already had a name. People saw the suffering it was causing in their families, in their communities. And when you look at names, these names are all from West Africa. When you look at names that, like you see from the Ghanaian languages, they emphasize trauma and pain. My loved one is suffering. They are crying, and it hurts. If you go to Nigeria, you'll see names that have to do with mortality. Why does my child, I keep on giving birth to children and they keep on dying? What is happening? I think they must be getting reincarnated because it's the same thing. I see the same problem happening to this child too. So sickle cell is synonymous with pain and suffering. I think it's wonderful that it also has beautiful shaped cells that you can look under a microscope, but it's synonymous with pain and suffering, and that is the definition of sickle cell disease. So when you know the definition, that it's more than just a blood disorder and something for scientists to puzzle solve about, it's a public health disorder, you can then redefine the problem. Because if you focus on it, just the scientific parts, the innovation parts, you're not going to make the impact that you're looking for. Many of you may be familiar with this painting called 10 Redefined, and it's from a sadly late artist named Hertz Nazaire. So in the United States, people like you back in the 60s and 70s were like, we've had enough. We're seeing the pain and suffering in our communities. We need to do better. And that led to the first legislation for sickle cell disease in the United States in 1972 under President Nixon. And in his words, we need to reverse the record of neglect. And this is just a shout out to some of the groups that participated in those movements back then. You don't need to memorize this or see this. I just showed this timeline, and I think the Canadians in the room, maybe yesterday you may have heard this, and I think a talk today, but I think the plenary may have discussed, how do you move action? Usually it takes policy, and I bolded the 3 different acts in the United States that after those acts, you saw changes from the federal level and the state level to help patients. And now we're in an age where innovation has surpassed our wildest imaginations. So sickle cell, because it's been such this scientific darling and mystery, a lot of science has been to the level of the Nobel Prize. So during World Sickle Cell Day this year, Nobel Prize was like, oh, hey, we wanted to remind you on World Sickle Cell Day that Linus Pauling actually won a Nobel Prize back in the 50s because of his work with proteins and molecules and understanding things like hemoglobin. And then look at what happened in 2020. Another Nobel Prize went into this concept of CRISPR therapy, which is a type of gene editing. So you can see that sickle cell being this biological, scientific mystery, it led us to some of our highest levels of science. Now, these scientists were studying all sorts of things, but they have overlapped into the sickle cell space. But it gets complicated. You know, since I became a doctor, when people ask me, so are you excited about new therapies for sickle cell? I don't know how to answer the question. So yes, on one level, I'm happy, like the famed song. I'm really excited. Thank you to the scientists that are looking through these. But I also feel that sometimes you're taking me into the middle of an ocean and saying, you should be excited. There's water all around you. Well, I can't drink this salty water. I cannot drink this water in the ocean, as this poem from Coleridge says, water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. And for me, it was this concept of, I have sickle cell disease, but if you ask me now when I go to my doctor, what do I do for my sickle cell disease? There was only one drug, hydroxyurea, that they could ever talk about. So yes, I'm excited that there's gene therapy. I'm excited that there's technology, but it wasn't that everybody was getting this. And you'll see articles like this. Sickle cell cure brings mix of anxiety and hope. And is it hyper hope, some of these newer disease-modifying entities or gene therapy? So let's go back to that question. How do you solve a problem like sickle cell? And what is the definition of redefining the problem? For the United States, it looks like this. We have to hold ourselves accountable. What is the problem and define it as the public health issue that it is. And these are some examples of various reports and groups that have come together on the national level. This is what it looks like in Canada. Just a small shout out to you guys in Ontario. Some of you may recognize this pictures from this article. This is a report of how many people you think are in Ontario with sickle cell disease, and the dots represent 2 cases. Most of the power of sickle cell data comes from newborn screening, but they also had mortality data. They had all sorts of beautiful things in this document. So if you haven't checked this out, really look it out. But this is how you redefine the problem. You're holding yourself accountable because now you know where people are. You know where people are, and you can do things to help them. While you're on your, way to save the world of sickle cell, don't forget the person with the disease. And try to remember that each one represents a lived experience that's unique. Fascinating biology, mysteries of the science part, but remember they represent a human, an individual. And I show this picture because only one box in this picture of the 4 things that I think impact a lived experience actually has to do with the person. Yes, disease is complicated. People are impacted differently. You have different genotypes. We have different coping strategies. We have all sorts of things that make us our own individual person with the disease. But then there are healthcare factors, social cultural factors, and structural factors that play a role in a person's lived experience. From the healthcare side, access. Does everybody live close to a doctor or to a clinic that knows how to take care of sickle cell disease? The therapeutic options, again, water, water everywhere. Yes, thank you, and how do we get them to the people? Social cultural factors, your family, your vocational, your academic attainment, the challenges related to that. And then the structural factors that feel invisible, but they're always present. Again, one of the major elephants, you're dealing with disenfranchised populations, generational neighborhood poverty, disproportionate environmental exposures, and disparate funding when you talk about sickle cell disease. And so that historical framework from 1910, it's no accident that it was discovered in 1910, even though transatlantic slave trade brought individuals with sickle cell disease to the Americas way before 1910. I don't think it's an accident the first discovery was made in an immigrant either, a person who had traveled to America for education, and that's the person that you saw with sickle cell disease. So what are the best practices for centering the lived experience in the work that we do? And I've summarized them into 4 different areas. One is ask the people who are impacted, ask the lived experience experts, this concept of nothing for us without us. And another way is to elevate the voices of those impacted. Break down the complexities of very difficult, complex scientific information, and also make scientific updates accessible. You sign up people for a clinical trial, let them know what happened after the trial's ended, let them know the importance. And so shout out to the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario and other advocates in the room that are being part of centering lived experiences into this quest for solving sickle cell. I don't watch the time very well, so yeah, okay. This is the end, so we could, I was trying to, this is this quick version of a longer concept. But I want us to all leave here remembering that sickle cell is an ancient disease. It's been impacting people for thousands of years. It's worldwide. It's not a rare disease. Millions of people are impacted. In Canada, thousands are impacted. In the United States, 100,000 plus, give or change, are impacted. But it's synonymous with pain and suffering first. Do not bring the beautiful red blood cell. I'm a hematologist, I love red blood cells. Bring the person first, the pain and suffering part. The outcomes that we see, those gaps in care, are related to structural disparities, and we have to acknowledge that and do the work to advocate to make things better. We're incredibly excited about emerging therapies, and I know there were some sessions today and yesterday that reflected on this, and so quite excited, but acknowledge this double-edged sword of a disease that has brought science so far, and yet the public health part is still playing catch-up. When you center the lived experience, not only is it essential, not only is it critical, it makes things better. Your work becomes more meaningful and impactful. So I want to say thank you to the SCAGO and to all of you here today. Thank you for the work that you do. For those that are impacted by sickle cell in their day-to-day lives, thank you for being you. Really appreciate just you living life. That's what it's all about. And we hope that together we can make that life high quality, and that's a shout out for a session coming up later, high quality, but also well-lived. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fasipe, for that inspiring talk to kick off today's procession. So, folks, now we have time for some questions and answers. Are there any questions in the room for Dr. Fasipe?
Good morning. Thank you very much for your talk. I am interested in that historical piece, and I'm intrigued by the actual name sickle cell disease. Like, you spoke a little bit around the sickle, how it got that part of it, but I'm curious, because it's not infectious, how did we get to sickle cell disease? I do know historically, Black nurses were blamed as the ones passing on the disease to their patients, and so, right, because I think that adds to some of the myths, biases people have around catching sickle cell disease from somebody, but it's called disease. So in our mind, when you think about a disease, you do sometimes go right to something that could be, caught. When you think of hemophilia, it's just called hemophilia. So I'm just curious if you have some words around that.
I'm going to ask you to repeat part. Even though you're using the microphone, I was having a little
trouble hearing me? Okay.
Yeah.
So my question really is, maybe I didn't have it close enough. My question really is, when we look historically at sickle cell, and I love that you talked about that, I'm interested, why is sickle cell called sickle cell disease? It's not infectious, but historically, there were false narratives around how sickle cell was passed from nurses to their patients. And I do think that adds to some of the bias and myths that continue to exist simply because it's called sickle cell disease. I've also heard sickle cell disorder, so I'm just curious at what your thoughts are around that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I heard parts of it, and I was like, I want to really get the full impact. So you were asking some of what I call the questions of the sands of time. There's a lot of things that I scratch my head about with sickle cell. When I think about what WHO, so the World Health Organization, does when they classify diseases, there's this concept of communicable diseases. Communicable means those are infectious, that you can pass them around to people, and non-communicable diseases. That helps me, it's almost like we're already in this mess. You've already named it sickle. It's been called sickle for thousands of years. I can't change the name to crescent or something cuter. Fine. I'll get over it. But let's help people understand. So when I look at what WHO does, they say, what are our non-communicable diseases? Since you have to make everything a disease, sure. Sickle cell falls under non-communicable, just like hemophilia. When I think of things like COVID, Ebola, I'll put them in communicable. But helping people understand that distinction is important. Even today, I still get the question that, how did I get sickle cell, or can so-and-so catch it from me in school? You still get this question about the myth around it being contagious. So it's an imperfect answer, but I started to frame it that way. And in the global health spaces, it's this emphasis, NCD, NCD, non-communicable, non-communicable.
Beautiful. Any other questions in the floor? I have one question to close this out, Dr. Fasipe. I really was compelled by that image of Pharrell doing his jiggy next to the...
I know y'all were dancing.
I was dancing. I heard it in my head, right? But anyways, but I love the juxtaposition between happy, and even though you didn't qualify the water picture, it seemed like desire, right? Because there's this happiness that people had when they saw the availability of these gene therapies, but it's still a longing to kind of get access to them. So I want to know, kind of from your own standpoint, what feelings are you grappling with, or how do you navigate that happiness versus desire in your own kind of lived experience?
I don't know if it's, well, I have decided it's a combination of personality. Maybe I lean towards glass half full, and I've noticed in the sickle cell advocacy space, against all odds, you people are hopeful. You'll hear my Nigerian accent come out when I think like this. It's like, we're hopeful. What else can we be? Is it because a lot of people have, in this room, maybe an immigrant experience to their backstory? You talked about your family. I don't know this power between how communities that usually are marginalized find strength. Some of us, it's our faith. Some of us, it's the community itself giving us strength. But you have hope. That's why I ended with the Emily Dickinson poem. I didn't quote it, but it was on the screen. You have hope. And hope allows us to still think and believe and dream for better, in spite of everything. So things that make me happy, when I read a report about 80-year-olds with sickle cell disease, I was like, this makes me so happy. I can just read this forever. Because I wanted to know that there were 80-year-olds with sickle cell disease. I'm glad that they are there, and I'm glad they were living their lives. And so I grasp the things that give me joy. I'm happy we have ways to impact the disease for the better. I'm happy I can look, as a pediatric hematologist, look in the eyes of the parents with these babies devastated that their beautiful child has just been diagnosed with sickle cell disease. And I try to channel some of that hope that things are better. And I almost make a commitment to them. Before your child is an adult, the world will still be an even better place for sickle cell disease. It will be a different place. That drives then the advocacy work. I just promised this poor family, this sweet family, that we're gonna change the world. We better get to it. We gotta get to it.
We gotta get to it. Are there any final questions for Dr. Fasipe before we? Perfect. One final question.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
I absolutely appreciated the even further historical perspective that you presented. My name is Anne Clark, and I'm from Ottawa. One of the other things, as you told that story, was the young man, Clement,
Yes.
from Grenada,
Yes.
who complained, as you know, the rest of it, about pain, and he was doing medicine, dentist, and he went back to Grenada and did practice. I saw his grave when I was there a couple of years ago. But my question is, how do you, and you've mentioned it a little bit, in terms of us advocating, but how do you kind of get people who study different types of diseases to look even closer at sickle cell and not see it as only a tropical disease? I say that because I went to a meeting of my alma mater, lecture, and that and it was on different kinds of medicine, and I raised the issue because sickle cell wasn't part of the conversation, of a lot of other conversations that was happening that should have been there, okay? And the person doing the lecture said, oh yeah, right, it is, that's unfortunate, it's seen as a tropical disease. I did a little bit more of the part of the lecture on that. But it is changing, continuing to change the mindset of even our leadership around the condition. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so
Thank you.
for me, I'm going to go to our honorable minister again. Thank you so much. Not only did he do welcoming remarks, and he has a busy day. I don't know what he's going to do. He may have to leave, but he wants to learn. And this person has access to rooms that we don't all have access to. So you now have an ally who, when you're not there, when you're sleeping or doing other work for yourselves, this person has now learned enough about sickle cell that I need a champion. I noticed, I'm sitting in this room, they're talking about diseases that impact. I noticed sickle cell wasn't on the list. So when you educate and empower your allies, they will help get into some of those spaces. That's one part of the answer. You at that meeting, I don't know what happened afterwards, if you talked to that person or not, but I hope, so every time I listen to something about sickle cell disease, I learn at least one new thing that I hadn't learned before. So, I'm at this conference, I'm gonna take notes later today too. I think we need to continue to educate in the spaces. When people come to us and you have allies in the room, educate them so that when they go to their circles, they become better advocates for you, even when you're not there. Or they'll call you as an expert. They'll be like, you know what? I don't know how to say this right, but so-and-so does. And I want you to listen to this person. It is because I emphasize the ancient part because it's a problem that has lasted for a long time. So it's not going to be fixed overnight. It really takes this marathon approach. But borrowing from the contagion, we have to now infect good education, good knowledge, and allow that to spread. And I think allies help us get there, and allies of influence for sure. That's, again, also imperfect answer, but that's how I see it when I enter spaces like the one you just described.
Sorry, Rugi. We have to move on to the next plenary session. I'm getting ushered, getting the broom. So one more round of applause for Dr. Fasipe, please.